Hello all, welcome to this afternoon panel discussion. Really happy that you could be here with us today. So as I said in my introduction, we've seen this real shift from payments being a financial convenience and a service to becoming increasingly central to how economies function. Some might say they're moving closer to critical infrastructure. Francesco, if I may start with you, do you see payments as critical infrastructure? Are they seen as such? And if so, what are the implications in terms of risks to resilience and national security?
Welcome, everyone. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is like, yes, is critical infrastructure, is a national interest. And I think it's always been to some extent, right? Like, and what we saw in the last maybe, I don't know, 30 years or such, right, is of course like an incremental shift from physical cash, which in a way was a very, physical way to control like the flow of payments, right, certainly among retailers, and then move that into, digital representation, right, and payment. So where we sit at the moment is that clearly we have a very concentrated retail payment infrastructure at all levels into, I mean, I cannot say a duopoly, would be probably unpolite to say that, but certainly extremely concentrated, like a couple of companies like doing that. And then on top of that, those two companies are certainly US companies. Now, let me unpack that a little bit. I think like the higher priority is what you want in any market, in any sort of like wide-ranging place of the economy, is to have competition. Because when you don't have competition, guess what? Like everybody is getting like a worse deal. Whether it's consumers, because it's sort of like consumer surplus that doesn't happen, or it's businesses that in this case are paying higher fees, or even just technology and innovation, right? Like the incentives to keep developing, keep pushing, like are less so, right? So I think like in absolute terms, you always want more competition, you want options, you want companies competing together to always offer the best possible price, value sort of bundle, right? And then on top of that, we are incredibly and incrementally more living in a world that is multipolar, like it has different pockets of interest, and sometimes like you're more sided one way, and sometimes you are sided another way. And this is a world that we all wake up on the eve of maybe Ukraine recently, and is kind of like continuing in that direction. Now, am I personally happy about that? No, guess what? Like, I always thought that, Western should be united together, and I think like we share Western values, and that's a good thing. But in absence of that, or in a world that is becoming a little bit more, a bargain, a trade agreement every other minute, then I would say, yes, you want to have different chips, and you want to be less captive of whatever is like the bargain on the other side of the table, right? So you bring everything together, and I think like we see today in a world where it gives us like very little option. Now, we do have an option, and I think like in the UK we have been campaigning that and spearheading that goes into sort of like the open banking framework, and I think like we have a national payment vision that is saying very loud and clear the direction of travel. And I think like we are lucky enough that there has been a lot of companies in this space spearheading this innovation. We at TrueLayer, we have been front and face of this sort of like payments revolution. We brought it in the hands of like the Amazon of the world. And now what we need to do is just complete the job, because like this is already creating a lot of competition, a lot of optionality. And so doing things like bringing that into legislative frameworks, just have the industry behind, have like collaboration of banks and processor and companies, right? I think like that will go a long way of creating these sorts of like resilience and competition in the economy.
Okay. Simon, let me come to you on that. I mean, at what point do you think FinTech innovation becomes a national security issue? And do you think firms are prepared for that kind of responsibility?
Well, I think it is already, and it needs to be even more embedded than it is. And most of my professional life has been spent looking at crises, and most recently as a podcaster called When It Hits the Fan. And what's fascinating about crises, and we've done 300, so I'm a crisis junkie, is that the nearer the crisis is to the world of sort of ephemeral non-tangible products and services, the more challenging and problematic the outcome possibly is. So I think it's incredibly important that companies in this space take this very seriously, because there's such a huge difference between something going wrong in the kind of old-fashioned world of there's a story we have to deal with the press, to what can happen to a payment system, to infrastructure, to companies. We've seen it over the last year or so with Marks and Spencer and JLR. If something attacks you that is in the FinTech or financial or cyberspace. So I think every company in every sector has to really, really see this as potentially existential.
Could I just build on that?
Yeah, please.
Because I think there's FinTech understanding what you're saying, Simon, and being, yes, we are very much part of the infrastructure, the national resilience. But there's also the brand of FinTech that still is seen as innovation, it's consumer-facing, it's funky, it's fun. Well, that was the old brand. That was in 2015, 2016. It's very much now part of the national infrastructure, the economic security. And indeed, it's because it layers all the way through. It's because perhaps it's more boundaryless, because perhaps it innovates quicker than maybe some of the institutions of the past, that it's absolutely critical to economic security. And FinTech needs to get that brand sort of out there as we're part of the solution. And let's talk about ourselves as that, as a multiplier force, as you say in your title here, because I think that's the role for the future.
And do you think, given that you say they need to get out there, do you think they're prepared, FinTech firms are prepared to take on the responsibility which comes with supporting security and resilience at a national level? It's quite a big ask as well.
That's a great question, because I'm not sure that a FinTech would have a different view, the boards of a FinTech, than perhaps the boards of an established player. Indeed, perhaps their boards might be more risk aware because of where they've had to come from and maybe some of the threats they've had to deal with as they've integrated across the ecosystem. So, yeah, I think it's all of us need to step up.
Could I just, I completely agree. I also think those companies need regulatory and political support, because what we're talking about here are the kind of problems and crises that you can't actually just expect to deal with on your own. So I suspect FinTech companies would expect there to be, and I think there's growing evidence that there is even more fulsome regulatory and political support for some of these bigger challenges.
Francesco, let me just come back to you. If payments, in a sense, are infrastructure, then should payment infrastructure companies be held to the same resilience expectations as, say, utilities and telecoms?
Sure, but I think they are greatly are at the moment, right? Like if you are a payment processor, right? Like let's say at different levels of the infrastructure, you're regulated as such. Like you have to go through a lot of the test of being fit for purpose and security and resilience and do a lot of activities to make sure that you are resilient in many cases. Now, you can take that view at the level of as a single firm. You can say then, I want to have a diversity in general because that makes the whole more resilient. Like you can allow the failure of one, but there's going to be something else stepping in at that point in time. Like I'm making a very simple example. Like we are a pay-by-bank company. That's sort of our product. What we do, we were in the checkout flow of a pretty substantial merchant here in the UK that was connected to a very large payment processor a few months ago. So it happened that for whatever reason, that payment processor failed. And so because this merchant was connected directly to us and without going through this payment processor, guess what? They kept the lights on, right? They kept processing transaction. Consumer just shifted into pay by bank. We saw a spike of transaction. And at that point in time, cards or other payments, whatever, BNPL, whatever, they weren't available, right? And so the business kept on. This is a small example of what happens in a more systemic fashion. So yes, at the firm level, I think frameworks already exist, by the way. I think that is not new. We are basically, we are more or less similar to banks in many regards. And I think that we are kept to a very high level of standard from merchants, which is different than consumers. I think merchants they will push you on delivering that very high level of standard. So it's sort of the market incentive comes back again, right? Like you need to be great at what you do. But then there is the systemic view of that.
Okay, thank you. Katarina, let's bring you in on this conversation. Where have you seen FinTech genuinely strengthen resilience, whether that's in uptime, fraud prevention, customer protection, and where do you think the system is still more fragile than we'd like to admit?
We can tick all the boxes, I guess, but let's start with the most important one. I think we've all heard the stats that fraud now takes for 40% of all the crime in the UK, which in its volume just speaks about the national threat it presents to the country. And then when you bring to that most of those instances that have been reported have come outside of the UK, just speaks about the global scale. Now, other than that percentage and statistics that we get from the government and the national statistics, we can also look into the other reports that are available in the market. There is one amazing report I like to promote, our cybercrime report, that looks into 116 billion digital transactions on an annual basis to look into the new patterns that we observe on the global level. We have seen 8% year-on-year increase in global fraud, 59% on malicious bot attacks, which just tells us that this is automated, industrialized type of a threat that needs to be addressed very carefully. Now, it doesn't surprise that the whole national strategy talks a lot about disruption of fraud. And this is where I see FinTech as a really important stakeholder in that game. It not only can detect and prevent the crime before it happens, but with the whole intelligence sharing capability that is behind the network-based approach and data sharing collaboration on the private-public level, it really does make an impact. And just one last example that I'll take on that one is one of the clients that we had and the case study that we've done with them that speaks about the 71% increase on the money mule detection that prevented that money flow, so it disrupted from money to lend somewhere. And that's equally important as it is to detect the fraud, to prevent the money to flow further to initiate the other type of financial crimes that go with it.
Yeah.
I do think the 40% figure is extraordinary and deeply disturbing, and obviously it's a fact. I suppose what I feel is that, and Francesco talked about sort of competitive responses situations, I do think economic crime is an area where you can't just take a competitive response. It's got to be joined up, it's got to be coordinated, and people have got to see the threat as being outside the boundaries of a company organization, because the reality is that you can't, it's not containable in the same way, if I can use this phrase, as traditional crime is.
Yes, I'd totally build on that as well, because we're now seeing a lot of large institutions calling their heads of economic crime. There used to be heads of fin crime, heads of fraud, heads of cyber, because we realize the connectivity is there. And where the threats are coming from, they absolutely understand that it is joined up and there are gaps between those joins. Be it gaps, as you may say, Simon, because we just think about it inside our own institution, or because there's a gap because outside it's playing out.
And how does adding AI into the mix change the threat nature then?
So if I can take that, because I think it's a coin and has two sides. On the one side, it democratizes threat. There's a lot of actors out there that perhaps would not be so potent had they not used AI. They can now. So the threat landscape is wider because of the use of AI. 75% of financial institutions are adopting AI as we speak. And we're still unsure. We talked on another stage about the exponential threat. I think Contexta was saying that in the use of AI, which possibly is not so well understood. So suddenly the threat landscape has grown. But equally, we are using AI very defensively and intelligently. And as we've already mentioned on this stage, we are seeing threats and perpetrators before they attack. We are becoming part of the national security infrastructure by joining up with other detection agencies and the use of AI to enable security. And frankly, at the end of the day, a lot of us are in this space because we really care. We want to make society better and safer. And it's using these later tools to really make sure we can be on the right side of the coin.
Katarina, do you want to weigh in here? What's your view?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly summarized, but on top of that, it's not only that the FinTech has that responsibility and that role, but it's also seen as one of the first adopters of the new technologies and the new frameworks as well. The first ones to drive the use of the new ideas as well. I would take digital identity as an example. You will see that the first adopters are going to be FinTech community, and the responsibility that lies on it. Well, we have been working on the legislative framework, architectural framework. We now have to consider the interoperability, and the FinTech is going to be the first one to probably work on that challenge when you consider the different frameworks around the world. And not only that, but the first ones to be very creative on how we can make the best use of it, because we have now an opportunity to include not only the physical data attributes, as we have historically done, but now with the cybercrime rising, we have an opportunity to enrich that with the new data sets, and with the right mindset, with an expertise that I can recognize is in the market, we have a great opportunity to make that a really successful story.
And I just wanted to add, actually, I think the paradox is, of course, that AI will make a lot of jobs in the FinTech world, which isn't that old, probably even more interesting and less repetitive and less operational. So there's a sort of paradox, which is the very thing we might be concerned about could drive even greater productivity in one of our fastest growing sectors.
Absolutely. Well, we've got just under 3 minutes left. I wonder if I could ask you all for a final thought. The Chancellor was maybe going to be here today. She wasn't able to attend. We had that message from her earlier this morning. But if she was here, what would your message to her be when it comes to one priority the government should focus on in this area of national security? Louise?
Thank you. So I'm going to hark back to the Khalifa Review, which is 5 years old now. And a lot of the recommendations have been progressed, and there are some that are more systemic that haven't. So I'm going to say, if we could adopt digital identity ubiquitously and have it trusted across the UK, it would be at the heart of solving for a lot of our systemic international and national crime and risk parameters.
So a small ask then, Louise. Yeah, okay. Simon?
Well, of course, the first thing I'd say to the Chancellor is don't panic.
About what, precisely?
Or just don't panic. I think, what's interesting about this gathering year on is, to me, how much more positive the atmosphere is in terms of the relationship between FinTech companies and the government and regulators. It's just a fact. You can feel it. It's palpable. So I think my advice would be just keep that communication going. It's not always easy, but I think it's so much better when you have a proper, stabilized communication structure that it means at the very least the opportunities for misunderstandings and misinterpretation are not there.
And there's been a lot of talk about how the communication has improved a lot over the course of today. It's come up a few times.
The Minister now is happy to receive aggressive WhatsApp, she told us this morning. Yeah.
Spread that word. Katarina?
So I mentioned before, it's a borderless crime, so I think just pushing for the closer private-public collaboration on the global scale, rather than just on the national cross-sector level. And on top of that, I would also like to see a lot more creativity and flexibility when it comes to new ideas, how we can adopt new technology and frameworks when it comes to preventing economic crime.
Thank you. And Francesco?
Yeah, I go back on payments. I think the opportunity is vast, and I think it will make good for competition, economic growth, creating more resiliency in the country, and all of that. So, but what are the ingredients to make that happen? I think we have a splendid vision. We sort of highlights maybe the goals and the objective. I think now we need to get there. And how you get there? Well, you need to have some decisive actions along the way. Not all the actions needs to be governments or regulatory action, but a few has to be. And the others, the market will solve itself, right? But I think it's very important to always go back to what are some sort of blockers on the road that maybe only regulators can remove. And I think that going back to, maybe I spoiled a little bit before, my big ask is really let's move forward with a little bit of legislative action into creating a broader framework for open banking, account to account, that can, and pay by bank, all sorts of they are all saying the same thing, like is a sort of like in different payment infrastructure that can go and solve and create all those positive outcomes. And I think like it's around the corner, because we built the first like 80-90% of it, but just now we need to follow up with our actions, right?
Okay, some great asks for the Chancellor there. We have run out of time. Thank you so much, Francesco, Katarina, Simon, and Louise. Thank you very much.